Hello again, Steve here. I know the light's not the greatest here. uh, it's either too bright or it's too dark where I'm standing. Anyway, yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about a back and forth on YouTube I've been having with somebody. Somebody who seems to think anyways that because you live in a certain area that somebody else or a bunch of somebody else, even maybe everybody else, claims that they have put a boundary somewhere that even goes through water and they can't point to. It doesn't actually exist. It exists in their minds and on paper, which is an extension of the mind, really. Just because of that everybody within that boundary has got to follow the dictates. I mean, they do in reality, because all those people have hired a bunch of hired guns who will kill you if you don't. So to that extent you do, but he seems to think it's legitimate even, which is, I don't think it's odd. I mean, I used to think that too, but just using it rationally, if you don't agree that I should govern over you, then I don't govern over you, basically. It doesn't matter if it's 1 million people or 30 million people or 100 million people. If I haven't agreed, I haven't agreed. I don't know. Unless you admit to believing in slavery, well then you're honest, right? Now, I don't know if, I think probably a lot of people do realize this, but I don't know how many people realize this. This concept of, because the discussion descended into the concept of rape, that this gentleman seemed to think that we need cops and judges and all these politicians and so on to take care of rapists. I don't know. I think, as far as I know, anybody can arrest a rapist. I can arrest a rapist. If I see somebody raping somebody over there, I can go and arrest them. I don't need to be a cop to do that. That is sort of like self-defense. Self-defense is, I don't need to know some criminal code if somebody's beating me up to defend myself. I don't have to say, hang on a second here, according to section such and such of a criminal code, you can't do that and I can do this. No, of course not. And it's the same with our fellow human beings. If somebody is being assaulted, we don't need to know any criminal codes and stuff. This is common sense. This goes back to time immemorial. This is just basic human decency, right? We do not. Cops, as far as I understand, cops operate under two areas. They operate as a peace officer with one hat, and as policy enforcement officers with the other hat. Proverbial hat, right? Now, peace officers, they've got nothing more than any of us have. An officer of the peace is just basically somebody who will say, I'll stand here and keep the peace. That's it. If I see somebody beating up somebody over there, I'll go and stop it. Go and step in between or whatever. In fact, I was at an event a few weeks back. I was actually at an auction, and somebody started yelling at somebody else. The auction staff was worried, so they called the cops. The cops showed up, and they thought that right away that the cops were just going to arrest this guy, or they were going to, put him in handcuffs or something like that. And they did arrest him in the terms of arresting. They told him, you calm down, this sort of thing. But they weren't going to get involved because this is a private matter. It's just, so the cop in that case was just like, if they'd found a 6'8" guy, said, hey buddy, come on over here, give me a hand, this guy's threatening me. There's no difference. That's a peace officer level, right? The other thing that cops operate under most of the time, and this was the case, my understanding, with the altercation with Dean. Dean apparently wasn't wearing a seatbelt properly or something like that. That is a policy that we do not, as just everyday folk in society. If I see somebody driving down the road and I try to stop him and make sure that he and enforce policy upon him, I'm not a policy enforcement officer. Police comes from the term policy, right? And in that case, the policy enforcement officer eventually, they'll have to learn, and they're starting to learn this in the States in certain areas. They're starting to learn that they have to find out if they have jurisdiction, if that guy is under their policies. And if he's not, it's irrelevant. And the discussion too went along the lines of how somebody in BC or something had claimed that because he wasn't subject to the statutes or whatever, he wasn't guilty of rape. Well, see, this is a fine, interesting thing, isn't it? See, nobody representing the rapist, or probably anyways, or anybody injured was actually making a claim. And therefore it was not a common law court, as far as I understand. It was a statute court. It was a criminal statute court. In which case, he's right. The Crown has to make the case that in fact he is subject to that. I mean, this is probably why O.J. Simpson, who had an extremely good lawyer representing him, was not guilty of the people down there instead of the Crown, right, or the state or whatever, coming after him. He was found not guilty or whatever of all these crimes, even though there was all kinds of evidence. But I don't know for sure, but maybe they weren't able to claim jurisdiction. Maybe, I don't know. However, when it went to civil court, when there was actually the family of whatever her name was, injured parties bring him to court. Now, there was a different situation, right? So that's kind of like the two sides of it. Is on what we want to call civil side, what we typically call civil side, anybody has access to that. You know, you can sue somebody civilly. It's still wrapped up in the system somehow, but it's in concept, a kind of a private versus like between an injured party and an injured kind of thing, right? A case. Whereas typically if it's the Crown or the state that's taking somebody to court, it's kind of like if you were a Walmart employee and you violated and you stole from a customer or something like that. The customer's not taking you to court or the little tribunal within Walmart. There'll be a tribunal within Walmart and you'll be penalized by Walmart, not the one you injured. And there'll be a specified penalty for that. It might be loss of pay, suspension, or whatever it is. And what Canada is, and the criminal code and everything, is just a large corporation with a bunch of rules for employees. And for those who are employed, but not in a private setting. It doesn't that's why the Constitution doesn't apply to private individuals. And Canada even says that. Canada spells it out. If you go to the Heritage Canada website, spells it out. Basically the Constitution does not apply to Canadians, or not to Canadians, but to private individuals. Which means that if that doesn't apply, then neither does the criminal code, neither does the traffic code, neither does anything. Dog litter bylaws and stuff like that. None of them apply. They only apply to government employees, right? Government persons. Section, I forget what section 52 or whatever says that it applies to matters of government, right? That's all that applies to. So, I know it's a bit of a ramble here. I just wanted to point out the two sides that get played by a cop, and they will switch from one side to the other where it's necessary and where it's convenient. And most of the time they're spending enforcing statutes. And people also, the other thing that people often think is that everybody within a jurisdiction, within a fictitious boundary, have to follow the rules of the corporation that put in that boundary. Not so. I pointed it out to people before, because one guy was telling me, everybody's got to pay their income tax. I said, well, how come those Indians over there don't? Why? Because they got a different set of rules. That's why. It's like, or it doesn't apply at all. If you go up to Manitoulin Island in northern Ontario, there's something called an unceded Indian reserve. And there, it's like, it's not part of Canada. I mean, the government says it is, but in fact it's not, because the Crown, the natives never ceded their territory to the Crown. And therefore, you go there and there's no HST, and there's no, if the RCMP go there or the OPP go there, they get arrested as foreign invaders, and they run their own thing. And the locals go there, they buy gas for cheap and so on. And another example would be a diplomat from Peru driving around. There was a case a few years back, he drunk driving, he hit somebody in Quebec or whatever. There's no jurisdiction. Okay, the injured party, the family, could probably take him to civil court, but the Crown has no jurisdiction because he has what's called diplomatic immunity. That was the agreement they made with the other nation, right? Same goes for churches. Churches existed before governments, before Canada and so on, so they kind of supersede that, and they don't pay taxes. Judges are non-residents. If you look on the fine print of a bank loan or some sort of a bank document, it'll say, it'll reference judges and other non-residents. Judges, these are people who are just they're like phantoms. Has anybody ever met one? I mean, in other than in court? I mean, these people are outside of they're a different entity. My understanding is, I could be wrong on that. But there are lots of cases, and especially the United States is famous for that, because the United States was founded as the only real republic that ever occurred. All the other republics are republic in name only. Republic means that the individual is sovereign, and it's an upside down pyramid basically. And so government is there to serve me, which is in reality all that it ever is, because government is obviously lower than man, because man created government, right? If in the hierarchy of order of creation, it's kind of like God or whatever it is you believe that creates us, the nature or whatever, we're subject to that, and that's higher than us. Then there's us, and we're on the level with all the other men and women in the world. And there's what we create, right? It's only when we descend into that we become subject to those rules. It's just like if we go to work for Walmart, now we're subject to those rules. And of course, we've been trying to trick it. The attempt has been to trick us into this. The birth certificate was created, but not to our knowing. It has nothing to do with us. But we went along and used it. So the presumption is that now we have opted in, but we didn't opt in with knowledge, and the thing was a fraud for sure, because if there's not full disclosure, it would never stand as a contract for anything else. But I just want to point that out. The main point was that the peace officer / policy enforcement officer, two entirely different things. Cops as peace officers they're no more than we are. But what they do is they carry guns, and that's what makes them, and they wear uniforms, which is a psychological tactic that's used, because we've been brainwashed into believing that suits and robes and all kinds of Roman collars and all kinds of this bling bling actually means something. It's cloak and dagger is all it is. But aside from that, take that off, they're just naked, advanced apes walking around just like we are. And we have to remember that. That's what we have to remember. It takes a human being, a man or a woman, to be a cop, to be a judge, to be a businessman, to be a driver, any of those things. It takes that first. So fundamentally, if we want to be honest, that's what we are. All those other things are what we create. And if we go back to that, and I asked a judge one time when I was in front of him, I asked him for the third time, and right after he mumbled an answer, he ran out of the courtroom. But I asked him specifically, I said, why is it that man, woman, or human being is never in your statutes as having being obliged to do anything, to have any obligation. He got red in the face. He looked down. He wouldn't look up at me. I asked him again. He did the same thing, except he started shuffling some papers. When I asked him the third time, and I think he would have known that I could have declared him in dishonor, he looked up at me and he said, "I can't answer you that question. Or I can't answer that question for you." At which point he finished shuffling his and he buggered off. I was a little naive at the time, but if I was to do it again, I'd ask him, "You can't answer, or you won't answer." And my bet is he won't answer, because I was clearly there as a man, and he, I think, suspected what I was onto. There's, I don't know, look it up. You know, if you, all those different things that you talk about, cops and not robbers, but maybe cops and drivers and employees and all those sorts of things, all those words, we look them up in their statutes. It says a person, right? And you look up what a person is a corporation. I know that Wake Up Productions or somebody said at one time, that's nonsense. Of course, that's not only what it means. Well, look that up too. Think it over, you know, because it says in the Interpretations Act of this fictitious area called Saskatchewan that a person includes a corporation. Well, the word includes, in legal sense, legal is meant to be very specific. I did a presentation not long ago, and what I did is I had a box that was sealed up, and in that box I had put an apple and an orange, and I held up the box and I said, the contents of this box includes an apple and an orange. Now, based on what I said, what else does it include? Based on what I said. And everybody said, well, you only said apple and orange. So then I said, based on what this Interpretation Act says, which says definition section, in an enactment, the following words shall mean, or something like that, I'm just paraphrasing. Person includes a corporation and its heirs, executors, administrators, and the legal representation, or the legal representation of the person, something like that. So it's so it has to be at least a corporation. Based on what it said. Then I asked, okay, based on what it said, does it include a man? Well, no. Doesn't say so. Based on what I said, does this box contain a banana? No. See, this is the trickery. And not only that, I know a guy now fairly well who's a lawyer and serves as a equivalent of a magistrate on a minor policy infraction type of court setting. And I asked him about that. He, not publicly, but he said, yeah, you're right. So, I mean, the law enforcement side of it, or the policy enforcement side of cops, all has to do with corporations. All of it. The peace officer side, it's just like all of us. All of us. They're no different than us. Except they carry guns. They say for their own protection, but it's not for their own protection, really, realistically. It's to enforce policies, right? That's what it's there for. Because you don't need a gun if you're polite to everybody all the time, right? If you go around being nice to people, I don't carry a gun, I don't need one. But if you're a cop and you're harassing people and, you know, starting fights with people like Dean Clifford, then you need a gun or a taser or stuff like that to take them down, right? So, there's a lot to be learned, of course, but the main thing is we have to remember that everybody on this planet is our brother or our sister, and we all see things from different perspectives. I appreciate people's comments if they disagree with me, because almost especially if they disagree with me, because I get to kind of rethink the way I'm looking at things, and it gives me incentive to learn a bit more and to be more understanding and considerate of other people's positions, whatever it's worth. Hope this is helpful, this little bit of a ramble, and I'll get back to my little walk here through the park. Talk again soon. Bye-bye for now.